Fancy, I like it.
It's very
Pink
wordy.
TV, yeah. That was good, like, yeah.
Were you watching the live stream for 8 months? Taking the photos.
You want to switch with Amelia, and then Amelia, the one in the middle.
Cool blazer. Oh, wait, is the microphone picking up stuff that I say?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's alright. Yeah. Oh, I'll mute for now then.
Oh, sorry. The cafeteria doesn't have the best audio, but welcome everyone to Earl Haig Sachs Willowdale Provincial Candidates Debate. We have 4 candidates, so our 3 candidates here, and also 1 candidate online, and also an independent candidate sitting in the audience. If you want to wait, yeah, there you go. So welcome everyone. So yeah, this is in preparation for the June 2nd election. Next slide. So if you don't know, especially for our Earl Haig students in the back over there, there is an election coming up on Thursday, June 2nd. So what it actually is 121 mini elections in all the parts of Ontario, which will be electing 1 member of provincial parliament. Willowdale is going to be electing potentially a new member of provincial parliament, potentially sitting right here or wherever they are right now. And the leader of the largest party goes on to become the Premier of Ontario. So the meeting etiquette is pretty simple. So candidates, including our one online, and Ellen and Ashley will be our fake Hal, or like Hal if he was in person, because unfortunately he tested positive for COVID. So he'll be joining us online, and we'll display his face on the screen. So candidates will be given 5 minutes per topic. You can respond to each other after each person sort of has time to respond, talk about the question. We are asking all candidates to be, respectful in entertaining fashion, obviously. And also any responses will count against your speaking time. If anyone in the audience at any time has a question, simply submit it at tiny.cc/EHSS debate. It's a pretty simple URL, and the URL will be displayed on every single slide at the bottom in all the questions. So you just look up, and if you want to submit a question, Nada, who is somewhere in the room, will be running through the questions, and then we will ask them at the end of the question. All right, so next slide. There are 11 candidates running for MPT. If you've already voted or went to the polls, you'll see that this is probably one of the longest ballots in Willowdale history. I actually voted the first time, and boy, that was a very long ballot. So we only have, I believe, 4 and plus our independent candidate here today. Again, unfortunately, we did request something from Stan Cho, the incumbent MVP, but he said no multiple times. And we asked him 2 months ago, 1 month ago, a few weeks ago, and so forth, and we were just ghosted. And as well, we will have a video being played later, a little bit later after this, and that's going to be the new blue candidate who sent their regrets, but did submit a video for us to show everyone. So thank you so much to Joanne. And this is the rest of the candidates, and we'll take a picture. We'll also keep this slideshow earlier. So here are our topics, if you were wondering: education, environment, economy and affordability, healthcare, and transportation. So those are the candidates, those are the topics that are debated today. As well, if you are at any time maybe hungry or wanting to drink, we have snacks available behind you over there. So if you want to take something to eat, by all means do so. And if you leave early, you can leave at any time. Just be quiet and be respectful. So we'll start off with some introductions. I'll be this moderator for this introduction piece. So obviously, introduce yourself. You have a minute to introduce yourself. So we'll start off with from this way, and then we'll end up with Hal, just so that it's easier for us. So firstly, introduction, but also our icebreaker today is tell us your favorite spot in Willowdale. How's that maybe that'd be a cool icebreaker for you? So we'll start with Gina. At the bottom. Oh, turn it off at the bottom. The red light on.
Hello, hi. So I'm the Willowdale candidate. My name is Gianna Villa. I'm lived here for 7 years, and I'm really excited to see all the students here really interested in politics. It's great to see.
It's okay. It just sort of.
Okay. It's great to see that everybody has this debate. So my favorite place to go actually here is actually the back where I am is in Yonge and Finch, and there's a hydro corridor, and there's so much nature in that area, so I like to take walks there. I like all the restaurants that are around the area. There's a lot of Vietnamese restaurants, and a lot of there's so much variety, and that's so great, and I really enjoy the area. And I'm happy to be here in this debate, and I thank Earl Hay for the opportunity for me to speak here.
So sorry for the microphone quality, so I'm just going to speak up. All right. So we'll pass it to Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I want to thank Earl Hay and the East Council especially for putting this on, for all the parents who take the time out of their day to be here, and all the community members. I also just want to acknowledge the land that we're on. It's the traditional territory of many First Nations, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat that we're on. And it's really important when we have these meetings that we situate ourselves in that place, because it reminds us that we have ongoing treaty obligations, regardless of where we come from. For myself, Willowdale has always been a special place in my heart for me and my family. We've got a lot of close friends here, and I can talk about that as we go through the conversation. But one of the favorite spots I was thinking about this, one of my earliest memories of Willowdale was actually studying at North York Public Library for the LSATs. As many of you know, I'm a lawyer. Spent a lot of time there just preparing for, what was one of the most formative tests in my career, but this is a pretty important test myself about trying to figure out what I can tell you about my story that will resonate, but also why this election is really important. And for those of you who are participating for the first time, I hope you take the time to exercise your right to vote.
Thank you. Our Green Party candidate?
Hello, so my name is Monica Henriques, and I'm here representing the Green Party. And I grew up in Willowdale. I actually went to Earl Hague. Once upon a time, it was still the old building at the time. And one of my favorite spots in Willowdale, there's some great parks down here where I grew up in West Lansing. They're quite small, but there's a real sense of peace there. So I really appreciate those kinds of spots. And I'm here because I'm really inspired by the Green Party. I'm really inspired by what they're doing to take care of both people and the planet in ways in which those things are linked. So everything from the economy to healthcare, education, responding to the climate crisis directly, transportation, all of these things are linked, and taking care of people takes care of the planet and vice versa. So I'm really proud to be represented, and thank you to everyone that's participating in this process.
All right, thank you so much.
So thank you very much for allowing me to be here. I don't know if I'm talking over anybody because you're now muted for me. It's really an honor to be here, but I'm really sorry I can't be here in person because unfortunately I tested positive for COVID-19 this morning. And I have mild symptoms, which you may occasionally hear. As a doctor who visits fragile patients at home, this is always an occupational risk, just as I know that it's a risk for students as well, like you. I'm very grateful to the Earl Hague team for setting this video link up at such short notice because I feel it's a matter of respect to show up for you, if at all possible. Unlike another candidate who has no excuse except maybe that he's ashamed of his record and he doesn't want to face you. As for my favorite spot in Willowdale, well, I think that's obvious. Earl Hague is a very special place to me because I was a student there in the 1980s in the old school, and I used to help set up these very debates during elections. I'm very proud of the NDP's platform, and I'm really grateful for the chance to share it with you today. Carp, 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 DM, DM, DM.
William, sorry to interrupt. It's going to be very difficult to hear our NDP candidate at the back. Just to let you know, the sound's not coming clearly as you like.
Yes, sorry. I know that this is a problem, and we are just having issues, especially because we have to switch it.
Could you point the mic?
Yeah, okay, well, try to point the mic once he speaks again, and hopefully that will be a bit better. So let's go back to our slideshow. And last but not least, we do have a video from Joanne, who is the new lieutenant. Technical difficulties.
Hello, everyone. Candidate in Willowdale. I joined the Green Party in March. All the parties are but not you blue, we're different. Aren't you? Getting rid of all COVID-19 is regulatory vaccine passports. We'll keep all businesses and schools open. Secondly, we'll test a political party and subsidies and let the community fail at millions of dollars. We'll promote honest trade and support controls for activities park. Food rogers. Scrap and weakness with market tax, mitigate HST by 3%. We'll also improve education and healthcare by lowering administrative costs. We'll give parents a tax credit to use at school and care choice that allow children to care about. Lastly, we will hire back healthcare workers required to pass how long do you first? I will stand big seat in 2 years and will provide public input for each. It's critical that developers do not proceed with looking at directly. I'll make sure that people who without noise in police cars. If you trust me, you will stay.
All right, thank you. Oh. Oh, all right, sorry for that. So yes, thank you again to Joanne who did send at least something. Something is better than nothing in my opinion. So I guess we'll start off with our first moderator. Welcome Joy, grade 10 student at Royal Hay, and she'll be moderating our education part of the debate.
Thank you for being so kind because of the technical difficulties. Hi, my name is Joy, and I'll be the moderator for your education questions. So, the current government has faced controversy surrounding its record in education funding. The nonpartisan and independent Financial Accountability Office reported an astounding $800 million cut in the education budget for the 2021-2022 school year. If elected, how will you advocate for schools in Willowdale, supplying them with additional resources and funding? Thank you. If you'd like to speak, please raise your placard right in front of you. Yes, Paul?
So I think it's appropriate that we start off with education given the setting that we're in. And I have to say, the first political activity that I engaged in was actually a walkout and a student protest during the Mike Harris years. So this feels like a little bit of a, déjà vu for me, being in your position, understanding that this is your future at stake in this election. The commitments that we've made are pretty clear, and they're very straightforward in our platform. One of them is taking the money that's going to be spent on the highway that nobody wants, that won't save anyone any money, Highway 413, and putting that $10 billion into education, building and repairing schools, particularly here in Willowdale. Now, Earl Hay is one of the best schools in the city, one of the best schools probably across the province and across the country. And we know that even here, there's things that need to be improved, but all across Willowdale, there are students that don't even get to go to Willowdale because there's not enough school space. And that's something that we're committed to. In addition to that, we're committing to making sure that we hire more teachers, more special education workers, in particular for students who need that extra hand. We've committed to hiring an additional 10,000 teachers, 1,000 mental health professionals, and 5,000 other support staff. For students who are still, in the midst of dealing with the impact of the pandemic, we know that this has been a real challenge. We're going to do away with mandatory online learning. We know that that has been a particular challenge for everyone, and not everyone is equitably equipped to take advantage of online learning. Not everyone has the equipment at home, the internet connection, and so it's not fair for students to be forced to do mandatory learning, especially if they don't have the circumstances to do so. We're going to cancel the current evaluation system, the EQAO, and reimagine how we do student evaluations. We're going to end streaming in grade 9 and 10 to give people enough of an opportunity to figure out first what they want to do before they start getting shunted into specific career paths. And not everyone is going to go into post-secondary, we understand that, but we are going to increase the support for OSAP, for people who are going into university and college. We're going to make sure that you have the opportunity to succeed beyond high school. But for those who are looking to go into trades, we're also going to go into, we're going to create funding for people to go into apprenticeships and trades, so that wherever you are, whether you want to go into post-secondary for university, you want to do college, or you want to get into an apprenticeship, you have the options available to you, and you're not just going to be shunted to one path or another because of the circumstances that you're in. One thing that is really important here, and this might be a bit technical for some folks, but I know parents have raised this issue, which is the equitable access to education development charges. And this ties into a topic that's really important here in Willowdale, which is when we approve development, we need to make sure that it actually continues to support local communities. And we need to make sure that those charges actually go to improve the local schools. And we need to review the funding formula for the schools here in Willowdale or all across Ontario. Tying into this important question about careers for the future, we want to make sure that people are set up for success. So we're going to establish a fund for green jobs. For people who are looking to take advantage of the new economy, there's going to be new training programs as we switch to a green economy. But also for people who are interested in healthcare and helping us get ourselves out of the pandemic and recover stronger. For anyone going into...
Sorry to interrupt you. We just wanted to remind you that the 5 minutes is for 2 questions, not 1.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll leave it there, but in terms of the other commitments, let's turn you to our platform, which is on the Ontario Liberal Party website. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll just unmute myself. There we go. Thanks a lot. So education is a big issue. It's something that we find is important from childhood, and it goes way into your adulthood. And right now, our educational systems are a mess. And it's not just the last 4 years, although that has a big part of it, but it's the last couple of decades. And even now, during this COVID pandemic, I get letters home from 2 different schools almost every day saying there are children who have gotten COVID-19. So schools are not safe for us to go to schools right now. Just last week, there was a class that was completely unsupervised. There was no teacher in the class. That was in a middle school. This kind of stuff can't go on. But why has it happened? We have to look at the reasons. It's not just because there was a pandemic. It's because of decades of cuts and decades of lack of respect for teachers and educational workers. And it started back with the Liberal government. In 2012, they brought in Bill 115, which took away bargaining rights from teachers. And if you like your teachers and if you like learning, that's really important. And I was actually out there because I had 2 children in school, and I was out there on the picket lines with teachers to fight Bill 115. And it was eventually struck down in court. The Liberals also cut funds to special needs students. They also closed schools in a lot of communities, and the repair backlog ballooned to over $15 billion. And of course, they started the EQAO, and those of you who have taken it are aware of that. The Conservatives have been worse. Even before the pandemic, they made cuts. But in their most recent budget, they cut $800 million from education. The repair backlog has grown now to almost $17 billion. We had more closed days due to the pandemic than any other jurisdiction in Canada. Well, what do we want to do about it? Well, we want to lower class sizes. We want to invest in infrastructure to build more schools, smaller classes, and properly ventilated classes so that they're safe for you to go to. We're going to end the EQAO. We're going to scrap Doug Ford's online courses that most people don't want to take, especially since they're being sourced out to private providers. We're going to hire 20,000 teachers and education workers. We're going to make sure that there are people to provide mental health support in every school in Ontario. We're going to fix the rules around education development charges. I know that the Liberals are promising to do that too, but they're the ones who created the problem in the first place. So we're going to actually make sure that when developers build a building, they also build the infrastructure or pay for the infrastructure so that people can go to schools in their jurisdiction, not get bussed for a half an hour to go somewhere else. We're also going to fix the system for choosing people for special programs, and we're going to repeal Bill 124 because that directly affects education workers. Thank you.
I do.
Sorry about that. You may continue.
So first I just wanted to acknowledge that the schools and students and staff have just been through a really difficult time with the pandemic, with the opening and closing, online learning. So really the funding for the system is very important right now to create that sense of support and nurturing that is needed for learning. So the Green Party is very committed to funding the education system. So that includes putting funding towards the repair backlog, and you want the actual amounts that's in our cost of platform. Ending, as the other 2 candidates are saying, ending EQAO testing, as it's not equitable, and anything that's tied to funding that's going to take resources away from people that are struggling is just not a good system. Ending streaming, similarly. As well, just overall reviewing the funding formula to make sure that it's both sufficient and equitable. We would cap class sizes at 24 for grades 4 to 8 and 26 for kindergarten. And as well, I had a chance to look at the sort of proposed budget for the TDSG recently, and they're facing a significant deficit. And one of the areas that tends to suffer when there's a deficit is things like special needs, as well as outdoor education. So if we're talking about preventative measures in our society, things like outdoor education are very important. So making sure that there's sufficient funding for that, as well as access to green space in schools and curriculum about the climate crisis. We also have a platform for providing school lunch, a nutritious school lunch program, which would benefit a lot of people and also benefit local food systems. And in terms of post-secondary, reversing the cuts to OSAP so that there are once again grants so that people are able to access post-secondary education, as well as providing 1 year free college tuition for 60,000 students, which would be for jobs in the new green climate economy. I think that's all I'll say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne, you have the floor. You may begin.
Thank you. For education, the Ontario Party, we will work hard with all levels of government to fix our education system and not waste taxpayers' money by tackling major concerns and issues that affect the community. We will divert needed funds to better educate our children, give them more choices and freedom to decide. We also give freedom to the parents to decide the educational needs of their children in lower grades. The Ontario Party will reform the province's K-12 education system so the public school could return to their core mandates. And we will also look at educational vouchers, a system that, according to the current branch of government home data, year after year, the math and literacy skills of students in Ontario continue to decline. At the same time, growing numbers of parents are expressing shock and frustration as school time and resources are diverted from the teaching of core academic skills towards ideological instruction. Through the educational vouchers, we're going to fund K to 12 grade students, directly allowing families to choose the educational providers that best meet their children's needs. Currently, Ontario's public schools spend an average of $12,500 per student per year. Between 2/3 and 1/3 of that funding will follow the child wherever they receive an education, whether it be charter, private, or homeschool. Parents of children with special needs who choose charter, private, or homeschool will receive an additional funding to support their child in their chosen classroom. These measures will cause different groups of parents, educators, and business leaders to build schools that cater to the specific needs of the students, aided by the Ontario Party in financing and approval. For the post-education, we will lower the cost of tuition for colleges and universities for most high-demand programs. Ontario Student Assistance Program loans will also be made more easily available to students accessing these high-demand programs. We also will make it virtually free for qualified applicants to train in the skilled trades. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Exacerbated by the pandemic, young people's struggles with mental illness has become a pressing concern in the past couple of years. How will your party change the education system to help alleviate some of these challenges faced by students in Willowdale? Thank you. Monica, you have the floor, miss.
All right. Yeah, so actually the Green Party was one of the first to release a standalone mental health platform before the full platforms were released. And so mental health is, we believe that mental health is health. and that's something that's very important. So in our platform, there's a commitment, first of all, to increase spending within the overall budget of the government, of the healthcare budget, 10%. It includes creating access to mental health supports through OHIP, which means that there's a much broader range of people that can access them. There's a commitment to reduce wait times for youth to access mental health care to under 30 days. Right now, it can be 18 months or more, which is ridiculous. If you're in distress, you need help sooner. So that's something very important. Increasing youth wellness hubs and community centers where there would be access to mental health professionals and supports. So those are some of the key aspects. But along with that, some of the other things related to schools in general, things like having access to green space, having access to outdoor education. Those are all things that help to support mental health and generally reducing stress for everyone, which is all the other of the platform in terms of connected communities. And I also wanted to mention that the Green Party is firmly committed to being against mandatory e-learning. We believe that what's more important is a safe return to in-person learning. So the funding would include upgrades for schools to be both more energy efficient, but also upgrades to ventilation systems so that everyone can be safe in these environments. So very, very important part of what we're focusing on in our platform. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to speak, please raise your placard. Thank you. Deanne, you have the floor.
Hello? Okay. Mental health is a big challenge nowadays because as we've seen through the pandemic, there was all these closures, children had to stay at home, they weren't with their friends. That caused a lot of stress to the families, to the children. Everything was changed very quickly and we weren't prepared for this. Like the schools weren't prepared, the government wasn't prepared. And we ended up now with a backlog of 12,000 children that are waiting until care help. That is a tragedy that happened because of the lockdown, because of not having a plan. The government should have had a plan for a pandemic. They were about it for many years. And the previous governments had that opportunity to plan. And this is the result. We've seen that closing schools is bad for everybody. It's bad for high school students. It's bad for students. Learning isn't the greatest thing. We know that this is really not the way to work and happen to. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So sorry about the technical difficulties. Our deepest apologies. Yes, Paul Berman would like to speak.
Thank you. There's been a lot of stress. I've seen it in people all over the place, and it's really present in schools. And COVID has made it a lot worse because there have been decades of cuts to mental health support. The NDP we're committed to improving that. We're going to make sure that there's mental health supports in every single school so that people can get the help they need and be identified that they need help. But the other thing is that right now, if you need to go to a counselor outside the school, it's very expensive. And the NDP's healthcare platform is going to bring mental health care into OHIP so that you can go and you don't have to pay for a session if you need a counselor. And that's going to save people a lot of money and it's going to help people a lot. Another thing people are worried about is safety in schools, whether it's, am I going to get COVID or is somebody going to beat me up? There's been lots of problems with bullying in schools. I don't blame any particular party for that. But we're committed to ensuring that there are safer schools, more supervision, and also better, smaller classes with ventilation. So your safety is really important. You shouldn't have to worry about that when you go to school. But a lot of people are also worried about what's going to happen at the end of school. Am I going to be able to afford university? And there are studies that show that specifically in places, things like medical school, that people don't even bother to apply because they figure they can never afford it. And so some of our brightest minds are losing out because of that. So we're committed to completely revamping the post-secondary situation. First of all, we're going to support universities so that there are no schools going bankrupt. If they have enough support, then they can lower tuition. And secondly, we're going to take all of those OSAP loans and we're going to convert them into grants so that you don't have huge amount of money to pay back afterwards. So those are the things how we're going to help, and hopefully that's going to help with mental health quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to say just a quick comment about the NDP's funds for mental health. The cost per platform is just $64 per person for mental health services, and that's nearly not enough. We have committed, though, as a party, to hire more mental health workers in schools. We've committed to fully funding an extra year of school for those who want to stay behind and learn extra skills like coping skills, financial planning skills. We've talked about a plethora of other initiatives that we're going to implement, because I do believe mental health has multiple social dimensions to it. There's nutrition, there's financial security, economic security, environmental security. We all have to think about. That's how we address mental health in a holistic way. And that's what the Liberal platform is truly about. And that's how we will support students and the future generations.
Thank you. Okay, that is all for education questions. Thank you, and I will be passing it on to Julie. Okay, hello, my name is Julie, and I'm a grade 12 student here. Before we start, we have some advice to our teachers. Apparently the mic doesn't work when you hold it too close to your face. So for those who have been experiencing some difficulties, just try holding it a bit further, and hopefully those will be resolved. So, for our first question, we are in the midst of a climate crisis where municipal, provincial, and federal governments in Canada and around the world are all trying to reduce their emissions so we can meet the global warming to 1.5 degrees in the time. However, Ontario's emissions have gone up instead of down since 2018, despite the COVID-19 pandemic reducing road traffic and other individual emissions. As MPP, how will you ensure that Ontario gets back on track to curbing its emissions to 144 megatons by 2030? If you want to speak, please raise your hand. Okay. Monica.
I feel like I'm almost expected to speak first as a member of the Green Party. So, yes. So first I'm going to say this is the core of what the Green Party represents, is how do we respond to the climate crisis. And one of the deputy co-leaders of the Green Party is Diane Sachs, who is the former environmental commissioner of Ontario. And that was a person that was in charge of being a watchdog for the government before that position was eliminated. And she is one of the people that was one of the co-writers of our platform on this. So I hope that I can do it justice. Yeah, basically we need to decrease the amount of carbon that's being put into the atmosphere. One way to do that is to electrify as much as possible. So that means incentives for electric vehicles, also incentives for electric e-bikes, also electrifying transit. So moving to more electric buses, and along with that, measures to make transit more affordable, more accessible, more efficient. So adding more dedicated bus lanes, for example. Also cutting the fares, reducing the fares. So right now we've committed to 3 months, cutting all fares across the GTA in half. So that's a sort of short-term measure, and then from there looking at what is a reasonable fare to maintain so that it's affordable and that it's an attractive option for everyone to use. Also building options for active transport, so things like cycling or walking. I know that there's proposed redevelopment on Yonge Street, Imagine Yonge Street, which will make it much safer for pedestrians. as well as for cyclists. And having lived up here and tried to bike downtown, that change would be very welcome. Yeah, trying to create connected communities. So the Green Party pledges to create 15-minute walkable neighborhoods so that you should be able to access most of what you need within 15 minutes. And Al mentioned people having to commute just to go to school, for example, that's one thing, but also for work. And also making sure the services are within neighborhoods. So that would include incentives for small businesses to open up in communities to be able to provide those services more locally. So really working on developing those neighborhoods. As well, we would have a significant home retrofit program. So for people that want to make energy saving upgrades to their homes, which saves them money as well as helping the environment. Restoring and protecting water and nature is something that's very important. 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And that's important because as we've seen with the recent storms, things like wetlands, things like forests, those help to mitigate the effects of that extreme weather. We also have a climate adaptation fund because we realize that extreme weather is already happening. And so there's a $2 billion fund that would help municipalities in order to prepare for those kinds of events. So climate adaptation fund. Really giving a boost to create a green economy that is in Ontario. So for example, for making electric vehicles, for those home retrofits, those kinds of things create a lot of jobs, a lot of good opportunities, a lot of things that the economy, the green economy is coming, so Ontario might as well be involved and be at the lead. So these are some really important things. And looking at kind of the whole chain for that process. So that also involves involving northern communities and Indigenous groups to make sure that they're part of the process.
Mr. Zagale, you have the floor.
Thank you. And obviously, this is a question and an issue that's on the mind, especially the next generation, because this is the legacy that will leave you behind. The leaders of today to the leaders of tomorrow. So we do have a full commitment to cut our carbon and methane pollution by more than 50% by 2030. And there are multiple dimensions to that. One, we have to talk about it from the way we build, the way we move, the way we live. And individually, we all have a role to play in that, but also the biggest polluters and the biggest corporations also have a role, and they need to be held accountable for their carbon footprint. And the Liberal plan has full details on each of those dimensions, and I'll only talk about highlights here because there's only so much time that I've been given for to respond to this question. But one thing that we're aligned with is that we need to transition to zero emissions vehicles. We need to transition to incentivizing the purchase of green vehicles, both for consumers, but also for government fleets, because the government is one of the biggest purchasers of vehicles, and there's a lot of things like buses and other transportation vehicles that governments use. And the government can actually be a leader and incentivize the market to build more of those vehicles. And by 2030, we'll mandate more and more of these electric vehicles on the road. We've also established a rebate program for e-bikes. So for anyone who wants to purchase an e-bike, there's a $500 rebate. We're going to build more electric grids so that riding with an electric vehicle is actually a viable option. And we're going to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy and expand the green belt and protect more farmland. There are existing projects that have to continue and for transportation purposes, but one thing that we are committed to is getting more people out of their cars and out to public transportation. And that's why we've committed to reducing fares to $1 for any transit system in Ontario. Whether you're riding the TTC, GO Transit, or transferring in between, you're going to have to only pay $1. And that's going to incentivize a lot of people to get out of their cars and use public transit, which I think is super important. Again, another important question here in Willowdale is about urban sprawl and development. And so we're going to make sure that whenever we approve development, it comes with a commitment from the developers to build parks, to build recreation, and to densify in a way that's responsible. We're going to prioritize the acceleration of projects that respect the environmental constraints and the environmental rules around it. So no project will be approved that doesn't go through an environmental impact assessment. There are other things in our plan that I'll point you to, but I do want to say that this is an all society problem, and each of the aspects of our plan requires individuals, businesses, corporations, and the public sector to really lean in. And I think that's how we'll tackle the climate crisis, which is real.
We will now go to Mr. Berman online and then after we go.
Thank you. So I want to just start by saying that we saw this weekend with that terrible storm that we are getting more climate emergencies, more big storms. The climate crisis is real and it's here. And there have been decades of talking about it. Nothing has been done. Let's talk about the Conservatives for a second. Do they even believe in climate change? I don't think so. And certainly Mr. Cho's not here to actually provide any evidence that his government cares at all about the environment. All they want to do is pave over wetlands and create more pollution. They actually canceled a 90% complete wind generation program at an extra cost of $100 million. We could have had that clean energy, and he paid to cancel it. Now, that's one of the few good things that the Liberals did near the end of their mandate, just before they were worried they were going to get voted out. They brought in the cap and trade, and despite everything that they did, though, they never actually moved the dial on emissions, and the emissions went up. So we've seen a lot of promises, but the problem is that we don't actually get results. And when you don't get results, those promises are meaningless. We have a bold, attainable Green New Democratic Deal. You can actually Google Green New Democratic Deal, and there's a huge PDF with all the stuff we're going to do. I'd just like to give you the highlights. We're going to invest $40 billion over the next 10 years into this. And $30 billion is going to be from a robust cap and trade program through a clean tech bank, the first environmental bank of its kind. And another $10 billion from what's called green bonds, which are already being corrected. So $40 billion. And we're going to aim to be net zero by 2050. Public buildings, however, are going to be net zero. They're going to be retrofit to be net zero by 2030. And by 2030, all new private buildings and all new private buildings will have to cut their emissions by 50%. And after 2030, any new buildings will have to be net zero as well. We're going to electrify the GO train network. We're going to increase access to municipal transit. We're not going to do any gimmicky thing like a temporary decrease in price like buck a beer or buck a ride. What we're going to do is we're going to actually pay the actual 50% of operating costs for transit so that municipalities can actually afford to provide good transit service. And that's going to actually result in a much decrease in emissions. We're also going to invest in clean energy, hydro, wind, and solar. We're going to incorporate our grid with Manitoba and Quebec so that we can share electricity when one person needs it and one doesn't. And we're going to plant a lot of trees, not like Trudeau promised. We actually have a plan to plant 100 million trees, and that's going to actually collect a lot of carbon. Those are just the beginning. This is not a gimmick that we're going to say and then not do. The NDP actually cares about the environment, and we're going to do it. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Orella?
Yes, thank you. So with the Ontario Party, we believe in air, clean water, clean soil. All the solutions given today are pretty hybrid in terms of bringing down the air pollution. But then we have to also think way ahead. We have to think about where we're going to put all the batteries that go into these cars. We're going to have to put it in landfills, or we're going to develop new technology to recycle the batteries. We have to think far ahead because we can't be solving one problem and leading into another problem. Because we also have to worry about the earth and the pollution of the earth, of our water systems underground. These are very important also. So I would go ahead and help, like for us, the business community to help the government in aiding us for the problems that could come out of using electricity. There's huge battery systems. There's these battery systems in the cars are huge, and fill a lot of land and we could make a lot of pollution. So we would work with the with business to see how we could solve that problem ahead of time before it becomes a big problem in the future. So yes, I'm for electric vehicles and for everything being electric, but we can't just let it go like this and then lose the land. And we're for clean air, clean water, and clean soil. So that soil is important for us to grow our vegetables, to grow everything that we need to sustain our lives.
Thank you. We will now be taking any candidates who wish to respond to any of the remarks just made by any of the candidates as our next question has already been answered by most. Monica, please go ahead.
Yeah, so first I just wanted to respond to what Jan was saying about the batteries, and actually I heard Diane Sachs address that batteries that are finished in an electric vehicle can still be used in a different context. For example, for renewable energies like wind and solar, those battery banks can be used, and even after that, they can be recycled. So just wanted to mention that. And I don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to say that the proposed hybrid work routine that the conservatives say will somehow magically help the climate. I don't know where that comes from, but that's opposing that hybrid is the main reason that I'm here as a Green Party candidate. So absolutely, the hybrid work routine and Bradford bypass, those funds need to be directed elsewhere, and there are so many better things that we can do with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other candidates wishing to respond? If not, we will move on to the next topic, which is economy and affordability. Igor?
Hello, my name is Igor and I'm a grade 10 student and I will be your moderator for the economy and affordability topic. Willowdale is in dire need of more affordable housing. While there is no lack of proposals, projects are often delayed or canceled due to the bureaucracy involved when the municipal and provincial governments have to work together. If elected, how will you and your party ensure that both social and affordable housing is built in Willowdale in an efficient and timely manner? Please raise your hand to speak first. Please raise your placards to speak first. Mr. Secretary.
So we've reverted to this several times already in the conversation, but of course, affordable housing is at the crux of the current situation we find ourselves in, and the future generation finds themselves at a loss as to whether they're ever going to be able to afford a home. So a couple of things that we've committed to, again, and this is very similar across all the parties, but we have a plan to build 1.5 million homes over the next 10 years. And part of that includes starting a government agency that will actually be responsible for building and selling those homes, so that we're not just at the whims of developers and their pricing schemes and the pace, frankly, of their development, right? If we are actually truly committed to this, the government has to lean in and actually do something about the supply problem. But not everything is just about building homes for people to buy, because I understand that not everyone is in a position to buy. So the other piece that we're talking about is creating rental house stock that will be affordable. And that is important because it's not everyone that can afford a single family dwelling. There's going to have to be different types of units that are built. And one thing that we're going to empower municipalities to do is build certain types of units, multi-tenant units as of right, so that actually expedites the development. And we're going to incentivize municipalities to do that by giving them access to a building fund. On the question about whether or not government should have a role in specific developments, what we're committing to is getting rid of ministerial zoning orders, and that will do away with the notion that anybody can build without consulting with the community. What we want to do is make sure that the rules are fair for everyone, And when new developments are proposed, that the community is consulted, but the plans that are put forward meet the city's plan. So because local decision making is best to understand how growth will impact existing communities and future communities. And then we will fast track anything that is designed to be affordable housing or long-term care or those types of homes rather than big high-rise developments. That will be the priority for future development.
Would anyone else like to speak? Yes, Ms. Henriques.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to thank Paul for recognizing that there are multiple types of home affordability. It's not just for home buyers, it's also for renters, and it's also talking about supportive housing for people who are on social assistance. So all of those levels are important. The Green Party has things to address everything at that level. One is, first of all, making sure that more gets built. So we have a commitment to build 60,000 units of supportive housing, as well as 122,000 new affordable rental homes over the next decade, and also funding some portable housing benefits for up to 311,000 Ontario households. So that would be something that helps those renters to be able to pay for rent, no matter where they're living. So those are very important. As well, providing seed fund for co-ops to be able to build more housing. And also restoring 260,000 existing community housing units over the next decade. So there's several different levels there. Yeah. Also, the other measure we have
Thank you. I'm not really sure if you can hear me or see me because I can't see or hear anybody else right now. But I'm very happy to speak about affordability in housing. My father, who's now passed away, used to tell me that every generation should ensure that the next generation is better off than they were. So he had a better standard of living than his parents did, and he was hoping I would have a better standard of living than he did, and I would love that my children should have a better standard of living than I do. But for most of us, we don't see that in the future. We see the cost of things going up, 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 and it's impossible to know if our children and our grandchildren will be able to afford to live in any way the way that we're used to living. And what about people who are currently living in poverty and just see no way to get ahead? Prices are going up, everything is going up. Housing is just one example of that. And housing prices have ballooned. And it's not just, like the Liberals would say, a supply and demand issue. There are a lot of different issues that are involved. But let's talk a little bit about what each party has done. Essentially, in 15 years, the Liberals really got nothing done in terms of ensuring affordable housing. Prices went up all the time. Housing was down, homelessness has been up. The Conservatives have done even worse. In fact, Stan Cho himself helped to block a plan to house over 50 homeless people in Willowdale. He actually blocked the project that would build the houses. The houses are ready to go. It's modular housing. The site is ready. The city wants to go ahead, and he blocked that. So last winter, 50 people or more spent the winter in homelessness, outside, freezing. And we know how many people freeze to death every year. The NDP has a plan to help with that. We're going to ensure that over the next 10 years, 1.5 million units are built. And it's going to include a lot of affordable units. Not all of it's going to be for buying. Not everybody will ever be able to afford a home. And not everybody wants to afford a home. So for some people, the flexibility of renting is actually better. The problem is, when you leave one place, you can't afford to rent anywhere else because the rent control was a joke under the Liberals and is completely non-existent, essentially, under the Conservatives. So the NDP is going to bring in real rent controls. Rent controls in which if you leave your apartment, the next person who moves in pays the same rent that you did, not $500 a month more, like what is happening right now. So real rent control, and we're going to also put a stop to rent evictions where people are actually basically evicted so that the landlord can make a few changes and charge more rent. We're gonna stop that because it's not right for people, and affordability is a very big issue which we take seriously. How many of you think you'll be able to afford a house in Willowdale in the next 10 years? If you can't answer yes to that question, I think you need to consider voting for the NDP. Thank you.
And now we will be moving on to the second question that is covered. So, currently, there are approximately 90,000 Torontonians on the Ontario Disability Support Program, or ODSP. Total annual allowance for a single disabled person with no children on the ODSP is $3,000 below the threshold of deep impact poverty. This allowance does not sufficiently cover basic necessities such as food, rent, and utilities. Elected as an MPP, how will you address poverty among the most vulnerable members of Willowdale, particularly those on the ODSP? Please raise your hand, Margaret, to speak first. Ms. Henriques.
Thank you. This feels like an easy one to answer. The Greens were out ahead on this one and have been advocating to double ODSP rates and withholding rates for several months. And the other parties have been forced to play catch up on this. And in fact, the NDP were originally proposing a 20% increase and are now pledging to double the ODSP rates. So, and that's because it was getting so much attention amongst people who are on ODSP, but also just in general in the population, recognizing that less than $1,200 a month is not enough to live on. And I'm just going to say that again, less than $1,200 a month That's not the amount for rent, that is the amount to live on. And if you have access to rent geared to income housing, which is below market rent, great, that might be possible. But there is a huge shortage of rent geared to income in this province, in the city. Wait lists for rent geared to income housing could be 10 years or more. So most people are forced to try and find rent within the market. And as I said, rent, I think average market rent, I can't remember what the number is, but starts around 1,500 or 1,800 for Toronto. So, yeah, so there's a term called legislated poverty. And basically what's happening right now is that people on ODSP, because of government legislation, are forced to live in poverty, and that's not right. So, I will say I'm a frontline worker, so this is something that I have a connection to in terms of the people that I support. I have to see what they're struggling with to try and, find a stable place to live. Yeah, it's really difficult situation. So I'm really proud to be part of the Green Party on this one and what we're doing to support people on ODSP who need that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henriques. We'll now be looking at more speakers. Mr. Rivera.
Yes. This one, it's close to home because I have a sister-in-law that's on the DSP, and she was talking to me just before the election, telling me that she does have this 1,200 to live, and we were helping her out because she can't make it. So, like as a principal, the Interior Party wants to ensure that we're helping those that need it. But we'd also like to make a system where they could actually have additional income, work where they're able to, and have some more income on top of the 1,200, so that they're able to try to get back to work. But it's very hard. 1,200, you can't live on that, and we help her all the time. But it's definitely a system that, like, it's basically poverty, and they're stuck in the system, and they can't get out, and it's really sad to see. And I think definitely the system has to be redone so that these people could live a decent life. So I definitely am for helping them with greater amounts of support and money or other means of support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Seguela.
So as I said in my responses to other aspects, there are many determinants in terms of vulnerability of homeless people and underhoused people. So the ODSP rate is just one of many multiple factors that impact somebody's ability to exist and sustain themselves in a city like Toronto and a place like Willowdale. So of course, we've also committed to increasing the ODSP rates, but we've also committed to building more affordable housing for people who are vulnerable. We committed to actually empowering municipalities and creating a fund that will tackle homelessness, not just in the context of housing, but all the social supports around homelessness. And so municipalities can access that fund to provide other types of services to vulnerable people. We're going to bring back the basic income pilot, because I think that is important for us to test regionally what makes sense for people. And as part of our overall affordability pledge, which is going to be important to impact everyone, but particularly those who need it the most. Like I said, we've committed to $1 transit fares across the province. We've committed to eliminating taxes on prepared foods. We've committed to making sure that we also bring back rent control. We've created funding for the creation of new co-op housing. So all of those things as a totality are part of the plan to address this particular issue, but also the affordability crisis in general.
Thank you, Mr. Seguela. Mr. Berger.
Thank you. This is a really big issue. And, one of the things that I would ask the Liberal leader or the Liberal Party is that they had 15 years to bring people on ODSP out of poverty. Why didn't they do it then? And do they really think that raising it by 10% per year is actually going to make a real difference? On the NDP, we have adjusted our policy. It's true. We're going to double the ODSP over 2 years. First 20% and then a full doubling of it. But we're going to do a lot more right away to make life more affordable. We're going to bring in real rent control. And don't forget, if you have to pay for your medications, if you have to pay for your mental health care, if you have to pay for your dental care, if you have children with braces or something like that, that's very expensive. We're going to make all of that covered by OHIP. And so you'll be paying for it with your OHIP card, not your credit card, as Andrew Horvath says. And that's going to save people thousands of dollars a month. Or a year, sorry, thousands of dollars a year. So in addition to increasing the ODSP by 20% the first year and then doubling it, and then fixing the system so that people actually get the support that they need, we're actually going to bring people out of poverty. Nobody, we've heard about this in the news, nobody should be requesting medical assistance in dying because they can't afford to find a place that's suited for them, that they can afford. And right now we're hearing about that, and that's frightening because that's not what medical assistance in dying is meant for. And if we are failing our most vulnerable citizens, that just can't go on. Now the Conservatives are offering to increase it by 1.5% per month. They are going to entrench poverty for people who are our most vulnerable. The NDP is going to bring people out of poverty, and we're going to make it permanent. Thank you.
I will now be passing it to Joy.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am back on the stand again. And this time, instead of education, I will be taking on healthcare. So, for the past 2 years of the pandemic, Ontario's healthcare system has failed to support both our healthcare workers and citizens. With hospital overcapacity causing hallway healthcare and shortages of intensive care unit beds a prominent issue, what will your party do to fix the shortages, burnout, and backlog issues faced within our province? Thank you. Speak, please raise your placard. Mr. Segal, you have the floor, sir.
So this is particularly close to my heart. Obviously, I'm Filipino. I have a lot of friends and family in the sector, and this is really at the core of the sacrifice that they made over the last several years because of the pandemic. We're committed to hire 100,000 new healthcare workers and train 3,000 new mental health professionals because we know that we need a full court press on getting the surgery backlog dealt with, but also better healthcare for everyone across the board. So we're also committing $1 billion to clear the surgery backlog, and we're going to establish maximum wait times. We're going to create 50 new community health centers and increase hospital bed spaces by 20%, including and also for PSWs, we're committed to raising their minimum wage to $25 per hour. For those in unionized sectors, we're going to repeal Bill 124, which is wage suppression legislation that has kept a lot of people out of the sector and just frankly made them move on because it wasn't feasible or affordable for them to continue doing what we needed them to do. More importantly, I think we need to sort of think about healthcare holistically. As I tried to talk about in other contexts, it really is about the multiple social dimensions of health. So mental health, financial security, environmental security, these are all things that keep people up at night and frankly impact their physical health. And so if we address not just the system itself, but all those other dimensions, all those other factors, we can actually have a healthier society. We can have not just a treatment mentality, but a preventative mentality by actually building a society that helps us become more resilient. And that's what the Liberal plan really is about. It's not just let's fixing what's obviously acutely broken, but also creating resilience in the system and creating resilience in communities so that we don't suffer from another pandemic, but also like all the things that come at us in this new in the new challenges of the society that we're ready to face it with a robust system and a robust economy.
Thank you. Ms. Henriques, you have the floor, Ms.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to say that the leader of the Green Party, Mike Schreiner, has been standing with nurses since Bill 124 got first proposed. And so that's something that is really significant. When we talk about frontline workers and all through the pandemic, people were saying, cheering on frontline workers, and then these measures came through with the Conservative government to basically devalue them by reducing the amount of money. And so specifically for nurses, Bill 124 caps the amount of increase in their salary by 1%. And when you've got inflation that's happening at 6-7%, that's basically a pay cut. So that's something that's really significant. And there are all kinds of reports about how burnt out nurses are. I can't even imagine. I mean, yes, I'm a frontline worker and I was going into work every day, but being in the hospitals, I think you're really seeing the full brunt of the strain there. So valuing nurses, hiring more nurses, as well as helping to train more nurses are very important. Also increasing the wages for PSWs, early child care educators. Those are some of the people that really take care of keeping our system healthy. And the Green Party is also thinking about more broadly Ontario as a whole. So for communities that have less access to healthcare, to have more nurse practitioner-led clinics so that people can get better access to healthcare even if they're not in a city center. So this is something very important, and also just in general, the mental health platform that we have to make sure that people have access to the mental health care that they need.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland.
One second,
You have-
sorry. The NDP candidate raised his hand beforehand.
So sorry about that. Mr. Merman, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. So I'm a doctor, and so I think I know a little something about healthcare. And this is my daily life. I see patients in the home. I do palliative care. I look after people in their homes. And we have been struggling in hospitals, but also in the homes for a long time. We don't have enough nurses. There are staffing shortages, especially in the downtown Toronto area, where we can't even get a nurse to go if a nurse needs to be sent to see a patient on call. They don't always have somebody available. With COVID, people are off because of COVID all the time. The Conservatives decide that COVID no longer exists, but it's there, as you can see. And people, even at the end of life, they're eligible for a lot of hours of PSW so they can stay at home if they want to. We can't find the PSWs. They've all left. Some of them because of COVID and they weren't protected, and some of them because PSWs are paid just above minimum wage. It's a poverty wage. So there's a few things that we're going to do. First of all, we're going to repeal Bill 124, just like the Liberals say they're going to do. But we're going to actually get it done. We're also going to get rid of that surgery backlog. Right now we have a 2-year backlog or more because of COVID. We're going to put in funds to do that. We're going to build more hospitals in places like Brampton so that our hospitals here aren't overloaded by people coming from there because they have no place to go. We're going to hire 10,000 PSWs, and we're going to hire up to 30,000 nurses, and there are 15,000 nurses in Ontario who can't practice because they don't actually have the credentials that they need. And so we're going to work with the College of Nurses of Ontario to help them get those credentials more quickly. We're going to actually resource the college so that they can actually put effort into getting these people able to help the people who need them. So that's what we're going to, that's a solution. You know, we have the other side is that if you have a little history lesson, Mike Harris cut beds and he cut nurses. The Liberals cut beds and they cut nurses. They closed hospital beds. The Liberals invented hallway medicine. The Conservatives saw it and they loved it and they made it even worse with Bill 124. The $500,000 retention bonus that Ford raves about, most nurses aren't even eligible for it. And it's an insult for all the work that they put in. So we're actually going to provide nurses with a proper pay increase. We're going to pay PSWs what they deserve. And we're going to protect them with a strong PPE program. The Liberals they had 3 pandemics to work with. SARS, MERS, and H1N1, and yet when COVID happened, we had no PPE for anybody. The Conservatives managed to get their friends very well enriched by producing PPE. But we're going to make sure that we have a protected PPE program so that everybody who needs it will get it when they need it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. Mr. Arella, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Ontario healthcare system is expensive and underperforming. Many people are experiencing long wait times, and the pandemic has only added to the backlog of elective surgeries. We have fewer physicians, long-term care beds, and a shortage of MRI and CT scanners. As the government, the Ontario Party will explore alternative care methods employed by other countries that has efficient healthcare systems, such as Sweden and Switzerland. But in general, will provide funding for greater public hospital bed capacity and the hiring of thousands of more healthcare workers. Will streamline the process for accreditation of foreign-trained healthcare professionals who've been trained in jurisdictions with similar accreditation standards as Canada. I've met these people lately, I've met a lot of doctors and nurses from other countries that are Uber drivers, and they work in factories because they're not recognized over here, and it's a real tragedy. So we're going to take care of them because of their experiences required here. Open up more spots in Canadian medical schools, which have been notoriously challenging to gain entry. Many smart, young, prospective Canadian medical students are traveling to schools in Ireland, the Caribbean, and elsewhere, then find jobs in the USA. It's time to keep the smart students at home. We're going to explore broadening the roles of nurse practitioners and the creation of other new healthcare providers.
Thank you. We will be moving on to the next question. As many of you here may know or heard of or first-handedly experienced, the current long-term care home system has been pushed to its limits with inadequate financing, poor quality of services, and staffing shortages leading to an outrageous death rate during the peak of the pandemic. Our seniors need a properly funded and regulated system to accommodate their needs, which are not being met at the moment. What will your party do for these long-term care homes so that seniors get the high-quality care they deserve? Thank you. Mr. Segal, you have the floor, sir.
I always get emotional when I'm answering this type of question because it brings me back to why I'm running in Willowdale in the first place. My grandfather died in Willowdale, and one of the things I remember the most was just the difficulty of getting him the support that he needed to stay at home and live with us. Because we didn't have a good robust system for long-term care or home care. And it pains me to think that had he survived a stroke that killed him, he might have ended up in a long-term care home, he might have been a statistic during COVID-19. So for me, this is personal, and it's important for me to just be firm in our commitment of what we have stood for as a Liberal Party. We will phase out for-profit long-term care here in Ontario. There will no longer be profiteering off our most vulnerable citizens, our seniors, and that is important for us to understand that we need to reimagine how we take care of our seniors. But not everyone can or will end up in a long-term care facility. In fact, a lot of seniors will prefer to age in their homes, spend their golden years with their family, living where they spent most of their life. And so we'll make that also possible by investing in home care so that people can get more access to PSW support in their own homes. People can build homes that are accessible, that they can retrofit their homes so that they can move around them. And for anyone who's supporting a senior in their family, that they can get a refundable tax credit so that the time that they spent is actually remunerated. So I think all of these things are important for us to think about as we learn the lessons from the pandemic. How do we protect the most vulnerable? I haven't actually spent a lot of time in this debate attacking someone who didn't even bother to show up. We know what his party's record is, what the so-called iron ring that they were going to build. I haven't spent a lot of time attacking plans that really aren't going to materialize because there's no chance for an NDP or any other candidate to take away the seat here in Willowdale from Stan Show. The Liberal choice is what you have, and I'm asking you to put your trust in someone who feels this issue very, very personally and passionately. If there is one thing I'm going to fight for, it is for seniors to make sure that they live the dignified lives that they deserve. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I hope you'll have your vote on the inside.
Thank you. Ms. Henriques, you have the floor, Ms.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think most of us have had some experience of seeing a loved one go through an experience of trying to navigate the care options available and maybe feeling like those care options aren't very good. And certainly my grandmother was in a nursing home. She spent time both in a for-profit one and a not-for-profit one. And there was a real difference in the staffing levels, which was quite disturbing, to be honest. So one thing that the Green Party would do is accelerate the increase in the average number of hours of care per day that each person gets in a care home. So that's something that's very important. Also recognizing that part of the problem with the pandemic and the deaths that happened in long-term care homes, a lot of PSWs and care workers have to work multiple jobs because they're often not given a full-time position at one place. So they're ending up moving from place to place. And that's something that increases that risk of transmission and of illness. So paying PSWs a real living wage is something that's really important. The Green Party agrees with the Liberals on transitioning to more not-for-profit long-term care homes and away from the for-profit model. And as well, making a real investment in home care because a lot of people would prefer to stay in their homes. So we committed to a $1.6 billion investment in home care, which I think would make a big difference to people and give them more choice and more options. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Berman, Mr. Berman is ready to speak.
Thank you. So, again, a history lesson here is really important. I mean, this is really important. My next door neighbor, who was in his 90s, fell and he broke his pelvis, and he had to go to a long-term care facility for rehab, for convalescent care, because the rehab facility wasn't available. And he got COVID there, and he died. And so this iron ring, this rusted ring of support is very important to me. But it started off with for-profit long-term care, and the Liberals had 15 years in which they improved for-profit long-term. They supported for-profit long-term care. They actually created fewer than 1,000 new long-term care beds in 15 years. The Conservatives, of course, have an even worse record. We saw that the Army had to be called in. What they saw was beyond belief. The number of inspections had been cut drastically. It was terrible. We can't trust the Liberals to fix this, and we can't trust the Conservatives to fix this. Only the NDP will do it. We're going to create 50,000 new long-term care spaces. We're going to hire thousands of PSWs. We're going to pay them good wages with benefits, and they're going to have full-time jobs, so they don't have to go from place to place spreading things like COVID. We're going to make sure that people who want to age at home actually get the support and PSWs in their homes if they want to, and nurses as well. Now, Liberals like to take your vote for granted, saying, only a Liberal can beat Stancho. But that's not really true. Because in the last election, where Liberals thought they were going to win, and they actually ended up supporting the Conservatives, NDP people won. Liberals have 7 seats. The leader isn't even expected to win his own seat. The only pathway to kicking out Doug Ford and actually fixing the problems this province has is electing a new Democratic government. And if you elect an NDP person here, that's going to go a long way to doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arala, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. My mother ended up in a senior's home, and my mother ended up in that senior home in Quebec. And in Quebec, they have a non-for-profit model. And there, what they would do is, whatever your income is every month, they would leave you $200 after paying the expenses. So anyone could have the same service, whether you're making $3,000 a month or $1,000 a month on your retirement. They would all have like that $200 at the end of the month. So that system was really good. They had the right staff. It was a public thing, and it was not for profit, and it really was a great way to take care of the elders, and I would support that kind of system.
Thank you. If anyone here would like to respond or have final remarks regarding healthcare, you have the floor. If not, then I shall pass it on to William. Thank you.
All right. I feel like I'm the best person to ask questions on transportation. People here, Mr. Webster in the back calls me TBC man, so that's why I'm here to ask questions about that. So we're going to cut it to 2 minutes because we're only having one question, and so that we can also get to the questions that are submitted by the community. So before Mike Harris, the provincial government used to cover all the operating budget expenses for public transit agencies in Ontario. And right now, the TTC is currently at an impasse. The provincial government has continuously refused to fund the TTC's operating budget. Years of underfunding have seen fares in Toronto increase, all while service worsens. Students at Earl Haig Secondary School have seen fare delays on the way to school. Just a few weeks ago, people were stuck at multiple stations. Shepherd Station, Northwick Center, and Finch stations, as we all know, are in states of disrepair. And while the construction of new, public transit projects is very important, the TTC isn't able to purchase new buses. So if elected, what will you do to ensure the TTC can continue to operate safely and efficiently? Give people time to think about that. Let them marinate in their head. Yes, Paul?
So I'll just start the conversation up again with what I said. The quote unquote gimmick that Hal dismisses is actually two-pronged approach. Right? Ridership is down across all public transit networks because everybody, or a lot of people, have had to stay at home, stay on public transit because of the fear of spreading COVID. And so how do you kickstart that if you don't incentivize people to fly? And also, how do you incentivize the buildup of services if you can't prove the business case that people are riding certain networks and certain routes? And so by subsidizing the fares, we're both addressing the operational issue, which is the cost of operating these systems, by funding municipalities and regional transit operators so that they can reduce the fares for their customers, so that then those customers are incentivized to actually use those systems. So that is the key aspect of that platform that you can easily dismiss if you don't understand the economics behind it, and you don't understand also what motivates people to take public transit. Now, is that the only aspect of it? No, of course not. And so there are other existing plans to expand the transit networks in the city that actually have to be followed through. And one of the dangers, of course, each election is that a new government comes in and just rips up the last plan, the last thing, and that causes the delays and delays that people are gone used to, unfortunately. And so what we've committed to is anything that is existing as a project that's already funded, commit to completion so that people have predictability and stability in the transit network build-up that we need to have, not just in the city of Toronto, but the greater Toronto area.
Thank you, Paul. We'll move to Hal, so move to him.
Thank you. This is a really big deal. I know that a lot of people use transit to get to Earl Haig, and I know that I used to use transit to get downtown when I had meetings at the hospital because it is the better way. But we really let it slide. The Conservatives are more focused on building roads that nobody needs across wetlands rather than building more transit. And as much as I respect Paul, I think that the Bucka ride is not as sustainable. It's a short-term solution, and we know people will ride the TTC but they won't do it until there's good service. And so just decreasing the cost isn't going to do it. So that's why the NDP is going to create a TTC 10-minute guarantee. We're going to increase the buses. Now, anybody who's had to use the Willowdale-Senlac route knows that a 10-minute guarantee is going to be really useful because sometimes it takes forever. We're also going to make sure that we increase the transit subsidy to the original 50% of operating cost. This has nothing to do with buying new buses. Buying new buses is not operating costs. We're going to spend the money that the Conservatives are going to spend on the Bradford bypass on buying new buses and hopefully electrifying the fleet as well. But what we're going to do is we're going to increase the operating budget so that there's more money to pay drivers, to keep fares low long term, not just simply with a buck a ride for a couple of years. Thanks.
Right. Anyone else who wishes to speak? I'll go with Jen and right, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, okay, so here in Willowdale, the transit system will be further improved to handle users with limited mobility. For example, mothers with strollers, the elderly. As I was speaking to the residents of Willowdale, a lot of the mothers that had strollers and all were complaining that they had a lot of trouble going through and using the transit system. And I think that issue has to be resolved and has to be further studied and improved. And also I use the transit system myself when I go to work sometimes. And I find that it's not as reliable as the transit system that I'm used to in Montreal. It's a different system, and I came from Montreal, and I found that we never had breakdowns where I used to live in Montreal, but here I had serious issues with transit several times. So I think that we have to upgrade the signal system because it's always breaking down. And we have to make sure that people find it reliable, which I think in my experience, I don't find it that reliable. So that has to be fixed in my view. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll pass to the Green Party candidate. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I mean, the TTC is in an interesting situation where before the pandemic, it was off the cover capacity, and I know because I was taking the subway from Willowdale down to downtown when I was doing my social work master's degree. And now the ridership is down, and which has given some serious cost issues. But regardless of all that, having a good transit system is very important both for the ability of people to get around, to be an affordable option for getting around because the car is not an option for everyone, but also in terms of taking care of the environment and addressing the climate crisis. Having a good transit system that is reliable, efficient, attractive, affordable is very important. So recognizing that, the Green Party recognizes that the Ontario government has a role to play in making sure that this is done properly and is funded properly because municipalities have limited options for being able to raise the amount of money to fund it properly. So we would commit to uploading 50% of the costs from municipalities back to the provincial government and taking responsibility for this very important system. As well, having a significant focus on keeping on electrifying the buses and priority bus lanes. So that's something that would help the system to move more efficiently, but also to have less impact on the environment in terms of pollution. And as we said, for the next 3 months, it would be cutting public transit fares in half. And then reevaluating from there what's an affordable and sustainable rate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that some candidates may have like some time left on their timers. If anyone wants to maybe jump right in. Some people have 30 seconds, 10 seconds. Any other last statements on transportation? Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you so much. And as a transit nerd, it's great to hear, all the policies brought forth by all the candidates. So I'll now pass it back off to Igor, who we'll do a rapid fire round on our community submitted questions. So hopefully they'll be fun.
Thank you, William. This round will feature questions submitted by Untitled students, families, and members of the public. Candidates will have a 30-second speaking time for each question. The first question is there a policy another party has that you would work with and would like to see implemented? Now raise your hand. Is there a policy another party has that you would like to work with and see implemented? You may raise your placard to speak.
I'll address this question maybe more directly. But elections are about choices, and each of us are presenting a choice in front of you about how we contrast to this current government. And I think a lot of people in the room are tired of this current government. So your choice is here among the parties who is best positioned to actually beat the conservative in this ride. Now, our party is also committed to say we'll work with anyone who wants to make things better for Ontarians, and that includes implementing ideas, should reform government from any side of the aisle. And that's what I'm committed to doing.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Is anyone else who wants to speak? Mr. Berger.
Thank you. So our party is committed to listening to everybody. We are the ones who asked the Ford government to have a multi-party group to discuss COVID issues. They never did it. The Liberals, to their credit, they were involved. The Greens were as well. I think if I had to choose one thing I'd want to work with, another party would be the Greens environmental policy, because I think that they can help strengthen our own. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that's a fantastic question. Yeah, I think you've hopefully heard that there are some similarities between the different platforms in terms of taking care of people, in terms of addressing a lot of these really strong issues. And yeah, I don't have a specific policy that I'm going to call to light right now, although, for example, the Liberals said moving towards not-for-profit long-term care homes, that's definitely something we agree with.
Mr. Arroyo.
Yeah, we're willing to work with any party the Greens have good ideas, the Liberals have good ideas, the APC has good ideas. Whatever helps the community to get better and have better services, whether it's schools, whether it's transport, whether it's the economy, we're willing to work with anyone.
Thank you, Mr. Arvella. And we'll move on to the second question. What metrics should be used to measure the effectiveness of government policies and expenditures that tackle climate change? What metric should be used to measure the effectiveness of government policies and expenditures that tackle climate change? Henriques.
Well, there's multiple things, but one is obviously looking at the amount of carbon being put into the atmosphere. There's already a measure called net zero that we're all aiming for, so that's something that the Green Party is committed to reaching net zero by 2045 and getting a long way there by 2030. Yeah, and also just general health and well-being of people, and expecting to see that benefits are equitable.
Thank you, Ms. Henriques. Will anyone else like to be speaking? Mr. Berger.
Thanks. So I think there's a couple of things that we can look at. So first of all, there are the scientific things to look at, the carbon in the atmosphere, temperature rises, things like that. And we're seeing that and we're measuring it. That's why we know that the climate change crisis is real. But the other thing that we have to look at is, do the parties actually bring in what they say they're going to do? And have they actually brought in the right carbon tax or the cap and trade? have they actually made headway? And that's what I think we should look at as well. The Liberals haven't done it, the Conservatives won't.
I think the major thing we should look at nowadays, because of the inflation, is affordability. We have to see if our community can afford the cost of housing, the cost of schooling, the cost of education. All these things have to be measured, and that affordability has to be calculated for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Bravado. Mr. Gill?
I'm not going to take every opportunity to answer the question with a partisan split. What I will say though is that what we just have to think about is what's the macro, like there's a certain threshold of the temperature rise that we can't go past, and we're almost there. But at the micro level, at the provincial level, our own contribution, our individual and provincial carbon footprint is the metric, and that's why we're committed to a reduction by 50% by 2030.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. And the third question, how should we combat a voter apathy towards elections and politics in general? Mr. Gill?
I think we have to stop the partisan swiping every single time I answer a question. But really what we're faced here with is a choice. You want another 4 years of this type of government that doesn't share the values that you share, the priorities that you share. And if you don't, then under a system, you have to make a choice about which person is in that best position. Doesn't mean that's slagging them and attacking them or their party for whatever sins that may have happened in the past. But what are they presenting in the future, and what credentials are they bringing forward? And that's what I hope for those 5 people in this election.
Would anyone else be wishing to speak? Ms. Henriques?
Yeah, well, I will say that me, for myself, becoming a candidate has actually been a process of really like reigniting my passion for this democratic process and really realizing how much of an impact government policy has on our lives and on the planet. So I just hope that more people hear that message and take part in the process. And the more parties would be respectful towards each other and really focus on the issues that matter and getting something done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Berman?
Thank you. I want to start by saying that, looking at the most likely person to win should be looked like this. Nobody is going to elect a Willowdale NDP candidate until the first time that they do, and the first time could be this time because we offer the best platform. But how to fix voter apathy? I think a mixed member proportional representation system, which I could speak upon at length if you wanted to, that's the best way to engage people and make them want to vote and have their voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. And moving on to our fourth question. What do each of you do in your personal life to tackle climate change? Henriques?
I can mention a few things. Some of it's small individual actions, like I don't own a car, so I do need to go somewhere by car and either carpooling, or I'm taking transit, or I'm cycling. I'm part of Cycle Toronto, which is advocating for more safe cycling infrastructure, which is very important. I take my own container to restaurants in case there's any leftovers. And, I became a Green Party candidate because I was so offended by the proposed Highway 413 and Bradford bypass.
Thank you, Ms. Henriques. Would anyone else be wishing to speak? Mr. Arella?
What I do usually is I take the subway or buses, even though, I have a car, because I find that we have to be responsible, we have to do our part to help the environment. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Arella.
So aside from Hi there. So aside from running for a party that I think has the best climate plan and is likely to put it in, there's a couple of things I do. I have managed to work as close to home as possible so that I don't have to drive as much. I now avoid taking unnecessary trips, and I'm looking into getting an electric vehicle. Those are the ways I think I can personally do it, and I can set a good example for others to try to decrease climate change as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Burger. Would anyone else wish to go?
William has already taken the title of Mr. TTC, so I'll give it out to him, but I do take the TTC everywhere, walk everywhere. But one of the ways that I think differentiates me is like, I actually am very much against consumer culture myself. I try not to buy things from Amazon or anything like that because of the incredible amount of packaging and unnecessary plastic and cardboard use. So I think if we all take time to reduce the amount of consumption that we do as individuals, we could actually make a bit more of a dent in our own individual carbon footprints.
Thank you, Mr. Seguin. And this marks the end of the rapid fire round. I will be passing it now to William for closing remarks. Sorry, Julie.
So originally, we weren't going to allow time for closing remarks from each candidate because we have to finish by 6 o'clock. But seeing as we actually have 7 minutes, we are going to be allowing each candidate to give 1 minute short spiel about whatever you want to say. And for fairness, we're going to go in the opposite order that we did for opening. So I believe we will begin with Mr. Bourbon.
Thanks a lot. This is the way you see how people can do an impromptu speech because we haven't had a chance to prepare because we didn't know about it. Thank you very much for allowing me to take part, even though it was remotely, and thank you to all of my colleagues who have taken the time to be here because it really shows who actually cares about this election and who is just planning to get reelected and takes you for granted. I think this election is one of the most important elections that we have in a long time. It's about your future, and you're the ones who are going to be living the consequences of what happens in this election. I don't want you to vote against something. I want you to vote for something. And I want you to vote for the party that has the best plan that's going to make Ontario the best place to live for more people. I think that's the NDP. I think we can do it. If people want us, we can do it. Jack Layton said, don't ever let them tell you it can't be done. So I'm not going to tell you it can't be done. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now be taking closing remarks from Ms. Henriques. Sorry? So we will go with the reverse order that we did for opening.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm very proud to be representing the Green Party and the Green Party's platform, which is both realistic and really addressing the moment, both for people and for the planet, as the climate crisis is now, and we can't afford to wait another 4 years and maybe do something. So I believe the school motto for Olympic is still Carpe Diem. So that's an excellent motto for when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis, Carpe Diem. And yeah, I'm just going to say that the Green Party believes that it's time to stand up for the environment, that homes are more important than highways, that mental health is health, and that we need to take better care of our frontline workers and nurses and our education system. And in closing, I'm just going to say that the environment shouldn't be a line item on a budget. It's a context within which everything else matters. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now be going to Mr. Seguin.
First of all, thank you again to everyone for being here. I think your participation in this process says a lot about how important this election is. And one takeaway from this whole debate, which is really this: you are voting against something by not returning Stand Show as your MVP. The question is, who will you vote for? And amongst the candidates here, you know the choice in Willowdale has to be someone who has a realistic chance of taking that away. Here in Willowdale, you know the forces are uniting against a specific candidate because they know that candidate is the closest thing to take away Stand Show. I'm asking for your support because I come from a background that actually has an inclusive and diverse lens because of the different intersectionalities that we represent, but also because of the lived experience and professional experience that I bring to the table, which is what I will use to serve you, future generation, the leaders, and the people here at Willowdale.
Thank you. Finally, we will take closing remarks from Mr. Rowland.
I would like to thank everyone for attending, our viewing audience for listening in and asking questions, and thank the moderator and Earl Day Secondary School for inviting candidates to this debate. To some, the Ontario Party is against lockdowns and mandates, and we will oppose any decision by the federal government to implement them. We have seen the incredibly negative results of these lockdowns. We have seen important family businesses close down, mental illness rising to 12,000 children. We've seen mandates come and go, come and go, come and go again. We've seen push for booster shots. We're up to 4 right now. I was physically injured by the second shot. So we have to look at what we're doing, and we have to analyze if we're on the right track. So if you vote for the Ontario Party, we will go back and we will see.
All right, Mr. Rowland, your time has elapsed. Thank you. Now I'll pass it to William for final remarks, and thank you for attending.
So yeah, I want to thank everyone for attending and our viewers online. Yeah, there are actually a lot of viewers online, so I don't know, subscribe, leave a comment. And also thank you to Mr. Webster, Mr. Akumada, who are the staff supervisors for that. I will also say Mr. Webster and Mr. Akumada saved us with the speaker and the, the report at the bottom over there. And also thank you to all of our candidates. I know that, we had multiple technical failures and also that last minute addition. Hopefully that was not too much. And thank you so much also to Hal who's online for joining us today. And for everyone else, thank you for being here, right? You're making local democracy happen by being part of this. And also, let's say, hi Hal, hi Hal, we're waving at Hal. So for those who do want to vote, I believe today is actually the last day for the advance poll, if I'm correct. Oh, the 28th, never mind. And also you can vote on June 2nd. If you come to Earl Hay, I'm going to be the tabulator, so I'll be putting your vote into the machine. So that's pretty cool. And it'll be open again from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So go back and get out and vote, right? That's like what this entire thing is for. If you want to know how to vote or need ID information, visit elections.on.ca and find out where you need to vote. You can also go to voter card email now. So thank you everyone for being here and have a great night. There's also vegetables in the back. I just realized if you wanted it.